Let's say there's someone that's non-military. That's another distinction that comes up. Military versus non-military. And Solitude Syndrome is the working name that I have for this one. So if it's out by the time that this recording is out, then you'll know what it is. Or he'll know like what the ideas were, what some ideas were in the process of writing it. So someone who's military would understand different terms and acronyms even than someone who's non-military. So there's a special kind of battle android. It's a battle robot that it's really powerful and it can dash really quickly because it basically has built-in jet engines to its body, but it also overheats really quickly as well and is extremely fragile as like this cost benefit of one shot and it's down. So focusing on evasion rather than armor. So almost a gamified aspect. But those are called Fleas because Fleas jump around a lot, I guess. But there's also something that the character picks up on later that they give names that are like buggish, bug sounding. So it's less of a mental impact on the human soldiers when they lose these units because these are shock troopers. They're put in really dangerous situations because they're really good operatives, but a lot of them will get lost in the process. So you can't get too attached to them. So the character, in a way, this guy who doesn't know this world that the other characters are established with, that helps to be a stand-in for the audience so that you can introduce new information to that character, and it's also introducing new information to the audience. It's a key part of that information drip where you're telling the audience, but you're telling the audience through the character's experiences as well. That helps them to be more immersed. So calling these androids, these flea androids with these jets built into them, are a very new thing that have not been around since the main character guy disappeared out into the woods to escape all the war and all the fighting. So this was a new military technology that was developed where this term didn't exist. They didn't have this tactic back then, so that these androids didn't exist. So you encounter a new term, and the person who introduces that term appears more knowledgeable and appears smarter because they are smarter. They know something that the other character doesn't. But it's common knowledge. It's later shown that this term, this name, is common knowledge. So while anyone could give that piece of information, the audience will see that character giving the information as someone who is more knowledgeable, even if in your world that knowledge is more or less commonplace. So there's this archetype of someone who wants to help others learn, this sort of teacher archetype that gets tapped into when you have a character who wants to help educate others, to help them learn and to help them grow. So long story short, with making characters sound smarter, focus on a couple of details about something that you're interested in. For me, with world building notes, I have someone introduces what those kinds of machines are, just a couple of details about them. Oh, they seem smart because they know what this machine is. Or if there's something technical that relates to like plot, like this character is on medications, this other character knows what the medications are. So just focus on a couple of details. Like a big thing is like other languages. You can fake knowing another language by focusing on just a couple of words. Let's just take a random word off the top of my head. There's a kind of mulled wine that's pretty popular in winter in Germany called Glühwein. It sounds like a glue wine. It's not actually made from glue, no. But if I have a character mention, hey, have a swig of this, and it's like, what is this? I've never tasted something like this before. Oh, it's Glühwein. It's a German, it's like my German family would usually drink this around Christmas. Just having that one word in German shows a connection to that culture, and also it references a specific cultural object. Glühwein is a German word, of course, and it's also a German thing. It's part of German culture. It's not part of American culture. So we're talking about a bunch of characters who like it takes place in America and they're around a bunch of hamburger American culture, and then someone brings in Glühwein or someone brings in Japanese sake. It's like, oh, they have a connection to a different culture, so that shows more character depth. It shows that there's another angle to them, and that could ask other questions of like, well, how did they encounter something that is outside of their current environment? That could lead in to character development. Another thing that I wanted to say is you don't want to fall into the stereotype of like, oh, this is the smart character where they're just always rational about everything. Every archetype can be done well, but you don't want to simplify things to the point where they're like a one-note character. You don't want them to be flat characters. So like with the female doctor, and this is like a point that I wanted to say at the beginning when we brought her up. So the female doctor is very knowledgeable. She's a medical expert, but she is also very caring. She has a very strong motherly instinct, and she has an archetype of being a good mother. She wants to treat the people under her care like she would treat her own family, wanting others to become healthy and to be the best version of themselves that they can be. So a very nurturing attitude. answered. When you're designing characters, you have like a primary trait of what they do. Like, it's really difficult for me to get past, oh, you define who a character is by what they do. To a large part, that is true. Like, even if you think in Dungeons and Dragons terms, this character is a thief. He steals things and does sneaky sneaks. You know, this character could be a thief, but that occupation doesn't tell me anything about his dreams and desires. He might be a thief because he had nowhere else to go and his parents abandoned him and whatever the heck. Or he could be a thief just because he's greedy and likes to steal stuff. Or he could be a thief because he's from a noble family and he'd have to do everything prim and proper. So his way to rebel against that and to have a life of freedom is to become a thief and live by his own rules in his own way. The occupation doesn't tell you that much about the personality, but when you combine an occupation with a personality, again, there's more to a character than just his occupation and his background. Backgrounds are important, but you don't have to define a character by their past, especially if they're dynamic. So what I like to do is have a primary characteristic, something that makes them stand out. What is their mindset? So occupation and mindset are how I outline characters. Well, and also with the Android book, I have to clarify rank and status as well, because that's important for who has authority over whom and like where they fall in the ranking order and what their associations are to different squads or to different nations even. But anyway, you don't have to get complicated with that. All I'd have to do to make this character, and indeed all I did for her initial character design, was doctor who is very motherly. It seems to be a low-hanging fruit thing of like, oh, she just is like traditional. She's like a traditional woman following a traditional female archetype. It's like, yeah, when have you seen that portrayed in a heartfelt way in media ever? Because there is a certain wholesomeness that's there that's really missing from media portrayals, because there's a lot of animosity towards motherliness. And I wanted to portray that in a positive light. And I wanted to say with the Android book, I'd also have to mark, like, is this person human or are they a robot? And in that case, the doctor is a robot. But it's one of those things where how they reference, like, using the inclusive form of things and what their perspective is it's not highly dependent upon whether or not they're human, because everyone still like communicates largely in the same way. The androids do have personalities because they're very advanced androids. They're ridiculously human androids, to use that trope. But how they would reference, like, we don't have to deal with things like depression unless there's some kind of neural net anomaly, which even then we could have someone write a bit of code to correct that, where it's much more difficult to quote unquote fix depression in a human brain. So if someone is an android versus if someone is a human changes their perspective on the topic at hand, in this case, the topic of depression. Their experience with depression is going to be different if they are a human as opposed to if they are an android. Their experience to going out and fighting war, going out into the field, is very different if they're a human as opposed to if they are an expendable battle robot that have died by the millions and are mass produced by the millions still, so they are completely replaceable, as opposed to humans where there's not many humans reproducing in this book and there aren't that many humans left. So that changes the evaluation of, well, what is the value of a life. That's more about broader character development and like perspective taking. But I'm saying this because we're leading into the other piece of advice. How do you write characters that have a different value system, different beliefs than you have? And so in my book, I portray different personality types across my books, not just within Solitude Syndrome, but in different books as well. I take a lot of different perspectives to create discussions and arguments and conflicts. Conflict drives stories. To create conflicts about important ideas. And belief systems are very important to our identity and our sense of meaning in the world. So in order to make a good argument, so I have to take both perspectives of the argument to figure out what's a reasonable perspective, like on a topic of depression. Let's say that we have our ruthless general archetype. He only cares about what someone can do to serve the army, and if they're useless, if they can't pull their own weight, then nobody's going to help pull them up by their bootstraps, because we're in a time of war and everyone needs to pull their own weight around here. Nobody's going to help you up. So his perspective on depression, he would, in a heartbeat, abandon someone who feels depressed and just move on and let them perish even. Whereas someone who's very empathetic, let's think of that doctor, who has a strong strong medical background as well, so she understands the underlying biology that humans have to deal with. But even if she didn't understand that, just there's an aspect of human dignity that someone who has a sense of caring would recognize, that someone who's strictly utilitarian would not recognize. So if, the topic at hand is some character is really depressed and the general wants to abandon him, which would leave him to die, as opposed to the doctor confronting him and saying, look, even if he doesn't bring anything to the table, I don't have a scene like this. I'm just constructing a scene on the fly from thinking of characters that have different personalities, creating conflict, and then taking different perspectives on that conflict in order to generate the story. So this is the story generation process from conflict as the genesis. What happens in those discussions drive the plot forward. So the caring doctor would have an opening remark or something where she'd say, this guy deserves to live, which opposes the general, this guy does not deserve to live. Okay, there we got our basic premises. Why does he deserve to be abandoned is one side of the argument. I'd have to take a utilitarian perspective on that. So I'd have to get in the shoes of, so I put my own emotions aside, which a lot of human beings just cannot do. A lot of people are bad at writing because they cannot put their own emotions aside and think, what would a person in this situation do? What would their perspective be on this circumstance? So if you have well-developed characters, then taking that character's perspective isn't going to be hard because you know what they stand for. You know what their take on a situation is. This general became very successful and led his way through many grueling battles by being terribly ruthless and not by being sympathetic and trying to pull everyone up who was otherwise going to weigh them down and then take the whole army down with them. He had to keep marching on and abandon people from time to time. So his experience is going to be different than a doctor who's sheltered from those kinds of decisions. Or she might have, and so this isn't anything that I've like planned out with all their backstories or whatever, but in having this discussion, thinking about what would someone in that situation have exposure to? Well, this doctor works at a military base, so she's seen people that are critically wounded. She's had people that have passed away. But from her caring perspective, I would say knowing that someone believes in them would help. She would definitely have seen people where they're on the brink of death and they're like giving up. They're like, I'm in so much pain, just kill me, please. Especially when someone's like delirious on the brink of death. That's something that she would encounter. And giving that comfort, that is her personality type, giving that comfort and believing in them and helping to encourage them back. Like, you're going to be fine. We'll be able to bring you back to full health. You'll be okay. Yeah, it's going to hurt a lot. Yeah, we don't have much medicine to go around. So it's going to be a painful couple of weeks and you're not going to be able to walk on that leg anymore. It's going to take a while for you to learn how to use a prosthetic leg. But you know what? I'll be here and you'll be able to lean on me. You can see how you could build a scene out of that. The doctor like recalling some experiences that she's had where someone would think that a patient is a lost cause. But she believed in them and she helped them. And then they went on to make a full recovery and become someone that was very helpful and fulfilling. That would counteract the very ruthless perspective that the general would have, which these are not my personal opinions on if I'm in this situation, what would I do? Because I don't have either of these roles. I'm not a general and I'm not a doctor. But I think in relation to what is not just what is their professions, they have experiences with a particular field. I mean, there are occupation related things that they've encountered, but also how does their personality color those interactions and how would that personality affect their decisions in the past, which would then shape their decisions on now. And I already mentioned that when you're having discussions, you will build out some of the character backstory. You don't have to have everything about the character backstory filled out all at once. When we are trying to make decisions in the moment, we often look back to our past experiences in order to better understand how can we make a good decision this time around? What worked in the past, and how can I take that past experience to create a good outcome out of whatever dilemma is in front of me? So you do have to be able to think in a very objective manner in order to write characters who have different belief systems than you. But when I first encountered that video on YouTube where it's like how to write characters with different belief systems. It didn't make sense to me. The premise of the video didn't make sense to me at first, because one thing, I'm usually not around these kinds of videos. I'm not in the milieu of people seeking writing advice. I kind of like sweep that under the rug because I like to actually do stuff with writing, or I like to express myself rather than be around so much with advice things. I kind of have a bad taste in my mouth. From seeing that video, how to write characters with different belief systems than your own, that helped me to realize something that I'd taken for granted. A lot of people don't look at things objectively. Well, I do have another hot take on this one as well, is sometimes you don't want to portray a belief system accurately because you don't care about accuracy. It's not about reality. It's about sending a message, basics of propaganda, bruh. It's not difficult to write characters who have different beliefs if you know what the characters believe in, and if you can set your own emotions aside and write something interesting about the conflict of beliefs between characters that you have. So the thing that I think is difficult is fleshing out the characters so that they have strong things that they believe in and strong things that they want and strong things that they are opposed to. That helps to make a well-rounded character. I think that's something that's missing, where if someone doesn't have those cornerstones, then they're going to struggle in portraying what that character believes in when they encounter some kind of argument where that character has to make a stance on something or they have to make a strong decision. As a final note to end on, I'd say that a lot of writing is an advanced perspective-taking exercise where you consider different thoughts, different situations, even different ways of speaking perhaps, that help you to broaden your insights. It builds up empathy as well if you're writing well. I don't even know if it's writing well, because you can write, the better you are at building up perspectives and playing devil's advocate even for things that you don't personally believe in, being able to set your personal opinions aside to put yourself in the shoes of another character, then that will help to improve your writing greatly. And you'll become more empathetic in the process. You'll be able to glean insight into why does this person think this way? Because you are actively engaging in this exercise of taking other people's perspectives, which a lot of people just don't do in day-to-day situations. I mean, if you're part of a debate club or something, you have to be in a real specific sort of situation in order to regularly engage in taking others' perspectives. Most of the time, people are just in their own heads. When you are writing, you are in your characters' heads in order to make words come out of their heads. I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next recording.